be seated. And the lawyer asked Jesus, "What must I do to inherit eternal life?" I envision the lawyer to be well-dressed for that time, articulate and probing, and asking the most important question that he can think of to impress his friends in front of this itinerant preacher. Think about it for a moment. Envision the scene. Close your eyes. How does it look? How does it feel? Can you feel it? What must it have been like? Were you pleased with your question? Were you really looking for the answer? Or was your question more important than the answer? Then Jesus looks at you and says, "What is written in the law?" You respond, "You shall love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, and with all of your strength, and with all of your mind, and your neighbor as yourself." We all know the history of the time. We all know the culture. We all know who was in and who was out, who was clean, who was unclean. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. And Jesus says to you, he looks at you and says, "You have given the right answer. Do this and you will live." The lawyer listens to the words of Jesus, a little humbled, and responds, "Who is my neighbor?" That famous, famous, famous line from the parable of the Good Samaritan. Was it a trick? Or was the man looking for a different answer? And Jesus continues, "A man was going from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he fell upon robbers, beaten, stripped, and left for dead." The story of the Good Samaritan is one of the most well-known parables in the Bible. Most of us learned it as children. Each of us can relate to it in our time today. Robberies, beatings, being left for dead. It is the news of biblical times, but also the news of our time today. We cannot open up the internet, we cannot listen to the news without hearing of these awful, awful things. But the words Good Samaritan are also a contemporary term for helping. It's an international term. We have Good Samaritan hospitals, churches named Good Samaritan hospices, and the list goes on and on. I share a story that came out of China this week. There were two teenagers walking along Lotus Lake, two girls holding hands, and one slips and falls into the lake, pulling the other one with her. And another friend was swimming in the lake and heard their cries and went to help them. Another friend was in the bathroom and heard the scream and dove into the lake as quickly as he could and tried to find the girls. They had disappeared into the murky bottom of the lake. After the failed attempts at rescuing the two girls, the two teens were just devastated over the drowning of their friends. They also faced something that most of us do not face: the societal pressure to pay compensation when you have failed to rescue or help someone who is your neighbor. China does not have Good Samaritan laws like we do here. And the monetary cost for failing to rescue these girls was 8,000 American dollars, far beyond the means of these two young people, and way, way above anything they could ever dream of coming up with. So in China, people are reluctant to help their neighbors in emergency situations. They're afraid that they will be blamed if something goes wrong, and they really are very fearful of the financial consequences. I wonder how we would feel if we did not have Good Samaritan laws. And I wonder how the families feel when they have lost loved ones. Are they angry because the people who tried to help were not able to succeed? Fear of the consequences of helping others can be all-consuming for some of us. We often hear, "I was afraid to get involved. I didn't want to interfere. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know it was this bad." Many are often preoccupied simply with surviving from one day to the next to help someone else. And many feel indifferent to the needs of others. A few months ago, I was pulling into the Bank of America by Rossmore, very definitely not one of my neighborhood banks. And as I was driving in, I saw an elderly woman holding onto the side of the wall of the bank, walking very gingerly. And I also saw several people going to and from the ATM, oblivious to this elderly woman. So when I parked my car, I went to this woman and said, "Do you need help?" And she said, "I really do. I don't feel very well. Could you help me to my car?" So I did. I held her hand, held her arm, and walked her very, very slowly to her car. She was a lovely woman and just having a bad day. But during that short encounter, I discovered that she was 95 years old and had at that moment made a decision that she was going to give up driving. "Good decision," I told her. "Good decision." She said, "I don't think this is really safe for me anymore." And so, as I helped her get buckled into her car, I asked her if I could follow her to her home. And she said no, she was fine. She was very comfortable now that she was sitting down, but her family would be really happy that she was not going to drive anymore. A very small encounter helping someone in need. And all of you have these small encounters each and every day. I see faces here whose whole lives are dedicated to helping others. Donna Colombo for her witness in the work of Trinity Center. Carrying that load, carrying that helpful spirit, but also carrying the cross of Jesus, as is told in the Good Samaritan. You don't always have to be beaten physically or robbed. You can feel beaten emotionally or robbed of everything, including your human dignity. So there are lots of examples of Good Samaritans in our midst here. We have individual things that each of us do, and also the corporate works of St. Paul's. So what does Jesus expect of us? Are we all to be Good Samaritans? Are we to be the Levite? Are we to be the priest? I suspect some of us will be each of these characters from time to time. But I do believe that Jesus expects everything that we have. Our whole hearts and our adoration, our tithes and our offerings, and our service to others. When we are called to be the Samaritan, we are called to wrestle with the words of the gospel each and every day through a lens that is ever evolving with the times and ever evolving in the world around us. and always staying true to the message of Jesus. In the early 1970s, I was a member of an ecumenical group of Christian educators who worked with an after-school program called Panorama. These were the high days of Christian education. Lots of energy, lots of excitement, lots of children in Sunday school programs. Lots and lots of children. So we gathered twice a year for 6 weeks, once in the fall and once in the spring, and created our own curriculum and program. It was also the time of open classroom. We did not have children in seats in rows or even in small circles. It was an experiential time in education. And we did a unit on Moses and the Israelites passing through the Red Sea. We made sandals, not easy to do with small children, and lots of cutting out. And we created lots of things out of sand and also baked bread. It was really exciting. And one spring, we visited a pig farm where we taught the story of the prodigal son. Anyone who was at that pig farm on that day will never, ever forget it. Oh, it was really stinky. And some of the children, of course, walked where they shouldn't have. So they went home with a gift for their parent. So I recall at that time, we taught the children a song. And it started to come back to me a couple of weeks ago. I was preparing for this homily. And it was a very bright song, but very true to the time, late 60s, early 70s. And it went like this. Who is my neighbor? Is he black, brown, or white? Does he go to church on Sunday or temple on Friday night? Who's my neighbor? The rest of the song has just leaked out of my brain. But I wonder, how would that children's song be written today through the lens of 40 years ahead of the 1970s? Would it be, who is my neighbor? Is she gay or is she straight? Is she welcome in church on Sunday or at temple on Friday night? Similar words, different times, always challenging. So I ask you today, who is our neighbor? How do we live with our neighbor? And what is Jesus calling each of us to do?